What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms.
You're listening to The Moore Show, and here's your host, Kevin Moore.
Welcome back to the show. We're about to be joined with our guest, Dr. Jerome Corsi. Here's a bit of background information on Jerome. He received a PhD from Harvard University in political science in 1972. He has also written many books and articles, and is an expert on political violence and terrorism. In 1981, he received a top-secret clearance from the Agency for International Development, where he assisted in providing anti-terrorism hostage survival training to embassy personnel. In 2005, Dr. Corsi helped launch the Iran Freedom Foundation, a non-profit educational and charitable organization established to educate the public about the Islamic Republic of Iran and to promote freedom in the region. He now joins us to share his research into his abiotic oil theory. Dr. Jerome Corsi, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you. Thank you very much.
How many books, Jerome, have you written?
Oh, I've quit counting. I've written 8 books since 2004.
Yeah.
And 4 of them have been New York Times bestsellers, 2 of them #1. And I'm writing another book right now called America for Sale, and it'll be available. I have to have it finished by April 15th.
Okay.
It'll be on sale in October.
Fantastic. And we're going to talk about your book today, The Black Gold Stranglehold. Could you just tell us a little bit about the background of that book, please?
Well, I've been working on that book for a long time. Craig Smith is my co-author from Swiss America, a very good friend, and he runs a gold company, a company that specializes in numismatic quality gold. And Craig and I have been fascinated about oil and gold and commodities for a long time. The basic thesis of Black Gold Stranglehold, my book, is that oil is not fossil fuel.
Yeah.
It's not dinosaur soup. It's not biological in origin at all. It's not made from decaying ancient forests or plankton or any other biological debris. The abiotic theory, and abiotic means not biological, argues that oil's origin is from within the mantle of the earth, and it's an understood chemical process in which oil is produced under heat and temperature conditions that are available in the mantle of the earth, and it's produced on an ongoing basis, which means that even today there's new oil generation going on. And the theory has profound ramifications. I think probably the United States is one of the few countries left that truly holds on to the fossil fuel theory. You know,
Yeah.
we have over here the Dino the dinosaur, which was a symbol for the Sinclair oil in the 50s. We've always associated dinosaurs and oil. It's why we call it fossil fuel. Well, if anybody thinks about it for a moment, fossils are not the animal themselves. Fossils are the stone remnant filling in with the structure of the critter. I mean, I always use the example of petrified forests, petrified trees. There's silica that fills into the tree itself. The tree is all gone and deteriorated. When the rock metamorphizes, it's silica that forms the petrified tree. And similarly, there's no deterioration of biological material into oil. It's actually a fairly silly theory. The Bible doesn't say dust into oil. It says dust into dust. The physical bodies, biological material formed into human bodies or animal bodies or plants, when the animal or plant dies, the chemicals deteriorate into the constituent chemicals. They don't progress into a higher form of energy, namely hydrocarbon fuel, which would fundamentally violate the second law of thermodynamics. You know, the second law of thermodynamics is that energy dissipates. You open up the balloon nozzle or the neck of a balloon and the air goes out. The air doesn't rush into a balloon. Well, similarly, when our bodies deteriorate, biological matter deteriorates in general, it disintegrates into constituent chemicals. And I ridicule the idea. I say, I've buried a lot of people in my family, and I've never once talked to an undertaker and said, you better line that casket with rubber because Aunt Matilda is going to turn into diesel number 2. Better put a spigot on the casket. We could use that fuel.
You can synthesize oils, and they're sort of from tissues, are they not?
Well, they're from various things. I mean, the truth is you can make oil, and if you go back to the German chemists in the Weimar Republic who formulated the Fischer-Tropsch equations, I think those are the fundamental equations that explain how hydrocarbon fuels are formed.
Yeah.
Of course, the Nazis used those equations to make synthetic oil and diesel fuel out of coal. The truth is you can make, from a variety of processes, you can make oil out of almost anything. You can make it out of sewage. You can make it out of chicken parts. You can make it out of biofuels like corn. You can form ethanol. There's a whole series of processes, and there are different processes. There are fermentation processes, etc. But if you take a look at the oil deposits themselves, for instance, and I also ridicule the fossil fuel idea by saying it's not the case at the end of the Mesozoic era that all the dinosaurs herded to Saudi Arabia and died in a big heap. I've managed to get the geological studies of the bedrock, the tectonic structure underneath Saudi Arabia. It was published a few years ago. There's a couple of technical books that can include the studies. And the bedrock under Saudi Arabia is deeply fractured. And it's fractured in a way that if morphs onto the oil, if you put the oil fields on top, it really, right below them, are deep fractures. In other words, it's the structure of the fractures in Saudi Arabia that permits oil that's created in the mantle of the earth to seep up through these basement tectonics into the oil fields in Saudi Arabia. Now you have oil geologists, really investment bankers like Matt Simmons, who wrote Twilight in the Desert, who argues that Saudi Arabia has reached peak production, and their production is now doomed to deteriorate, the rate of production reduce as they exhaust the fields in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabians scoff at that. I don't think Saudi Arabia truly knows how much oil they do have, and they've continued to be able to increase production even after Matt Simmons said the production was going to be exhausted. It's not that just these fields replenish, they will, but it's that the massive amount of oil that's available in Saudi Arabia with these bedrock fractures, I don't think has ever really been fully surveyed to know fully how much is there to begin with.
Okay, so we're talking about abiotic theory here, which is not
abiotic.
Yeah, abiotic. So it's oils that are not biologically produced. That's what we're saying, isn't it?
Right, and the confusion I think came from geologists. With these bedrock fissures, I'm saying the oil is produced in the mantle of the Earth. It's a hydrogen and carbon don't need a dead dinosaur or plankton or anything else to deteriorate in order to form oil. Hydrogen and carbon can get together perfectly naturally, and they do so throughout our solar system. I'm saying the confusion of the petrogeologists came in that over eons, oil did pool in sedimentary rock as it came through bedrock fissures. And the mistake was to think, well, those sedimentary rock levels formed the oil, and when in fact they just contained the oil. And of course, oil contains a lot of biological debris. It's going to contain that simply from the process of moving through the Earth and picking up biological debris. And then there's a lot of microscopic living entities that will live on oil, can live on the hydrocarbon fuel, and they become part of the hydrocarbon fuel over time. So there's confusion that because there's biological material contained in oil, that oil had to be created by biological material. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, I mean, you've sort of raised a few good questions there. I mean, how did dinosaurs get to 5,000 to 6,000 meters below surface level? I mean,
right.
Where's all this topsoil come from?
They were these big swimming creatures, and they just sagged down there and buried down in the. It's ridiculous. We're finding oil at depths of 7 to 10 miles below the surface of the Earth, and if you go back to the Russian petrogeologists, at the end of World War II, our geologists in the United States told the Russians they didn't have any oil. And of course that was unacceptable to Stalin. He just couldn't accept that Russia was not going to have any oil, and he insisted that petrogeologists in Russia look deeper. I remember as a child, which is probably how I first got onto this, reading in the libraries old science magazines which were reporting that the Russians were finding oil thousands of kilometers below the surface of the Earth. And I said as a child, there's no dinosaurs down there. And then the idea that there was biological material that deeply into the Earth that had been deposited there somehow or other that was causing the oil to form seemed to me to be equally ridiculous.
Sure. Now, just for our listeners there, you've mentioned the word, we've mentioned it a couple of times, peak oil. What does that just roughly translate to?
Well, peak oil was a theory that a geologist whose name was Hubbard for Shell Oil in the 1950s. Basically, it's another theory I consider to be one of these intuitive theories that's pretty silly.
Yeah.
He basically just took a normal distribution curve, a bell-shaped curve, and he said this is how oil is going to be in terms of its use in the world. That at first we didn't have very much oil produced because it wasn't very valuable. Then the Drake well comes along in Pennsylvania, and we start finding oil applications. So we produce a lot of oil, and we use a lot of the oil that's in the earth, and we hit the height of the bell curve. And then after we've hit that height, we're bound to run out of oil, so it's going to begin depleting, and we're now on the backside of the curve, down to the point where we run out of oil. Well, if you take a look at how there's energy economists, I follow the work very closely of Julian Simon. Julian Simon I consider to be one of the most brilliant resource economists. He was a professor in a business school. He's now deceased here in New York. And Julian Simon argued very convincingly that human beings have these kind of Malthusian fears about resources expiring, including oil. What Simon did is he went back to the 1850s and 1860s in Great Britain, and he showed that there was a panic in Great Britain at that period of time that Great Britain was going to run out of coal, and it was going to be the end of the Industrial Revolution. And in fact, there were books written on peak coal, just as there are books today written on peak oil. Of course, today we still have abundant coal resources. The United States is probably the most abundant coal deposits in the world right now. and we've never run out of it. And what Julian Simon argued was that there were several reasons. One, there was always more coal than was initially assumed, just as there's always more oil. As our technology improves, we're able to economically find and recover oil and coal that previously was not able to be recovered. Today we're drilling offshore, miles below the surface of the water.
Yep.
We're finding abundant oil in the Gulf of Mexico and off almost every coast. Something like 70% of the world is covered by water, and we've only begun to explore for oil under the surface of water. Julian Simon also argued that as resources are used, alternatives become available that are robust. So, for instance, oil was an alternative to coal. Today, liquid natural gas, and the ultimate alternative that's robust is atomic energy. That's a virtually inexhaustible form of energy. And France today, I believe, gets about 40% of the municipal power throughout the country from atomic energy. And Julian Simon also argued that as we expand these alternatives, what happens is that the energy horizon increases. So today, if you say, well, fine, let's continue to use hydrocarbon fuels, we can make them cleaner. We can certainly have clean coal. There's abundant oil in the world. We're not anywhere near running out. The Energy Information Administration says there's something like 1.4 trillion barrels of oil in proven oil reserves around the world. That's more than ever in human history, despite the consumption of oil worldwide doubling since 1970. So if we're doubling consumption and yet still have more oil reserves proven than ever, we're not running out.
No.
We can use it more efficiently. We can use it in a more clean fashion.
Yeah.
We can develop alternatives, liquid natural gas, nuclear energy. Some of these alternatives that have been proposed as alternative renewable fuels, specifically wind, solar, and biofuels, they're interesting, but they're not very robust. You'd probably have to take the entire state of New Jersey and convert it to a wind turbine to produce energy for New York City, and then the wind doesn't blow all the time, so you've got to supplement it with hydrocarbon backups. So you end up, if you study carefully, countries like Denmark and Sweden, the countries that have tried to use abundant wind power, it ends up ultimately utilizing more hydrocarbons than it saves.
Yeah, because, obviously, what's your views on alternative energies? Obviously there's wind farms, there's cars that, are running on water, some of them.
They have limited applications. I can imagine wind being utilized in a small community or a particular home. You could put solar panels on your home, and you could save money by having solar energy in your home. Or you could do it for a small town. You could do it for a factory. But to try to run a city of the size of New York or London or Chicago or Los Angeles on wind power is silly. It's not even far-fetched. It's silly. It can't happen. They're not robust enough. And the robust energy that could do it is atomic. And people, again, are afraid that we have atomic energy fears, that we're going to have another Chernobyl, or we have a 3-mile island. These are decades ago, and the United States Navy today is running a navy around the world on nuclear power, and we've not had an accident.
That's right, it is.
But the point is, if you think about it, if you go back to the point of, on abiotic oil, I really want people to get their minds around this, that right now offshore drilling and deep water drilling is probably the most interesting and advanced part of the oil industry, and there's been huge finds, not just in the Gulf of Mexico. This Jack field, which was found in Chevron, which increased U.S. oil reserves by 50%. These huge oil finds off of Brazil. Well, as we start moving into the ocean, we're going to find much more deep earth oil. The scientists at the up in Woods Hole Oceanographic Research went down into the crack, down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. There's a crack. It's called really all the entire length of the Atlantic virtually has this crack in the middle of it, And there's this Lost City hydrotherm field where these chimneys at the bottom of the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, exude these fluids. Well, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute went down and sampled those fluids, and they found them to be hydrocarbons. They basically are carbon-13, which is the isotope of carbon that is not biological, abiotic.
Right.
And so they determined that, they're going back again to do further samplings because they think that there are complex hydrocarbons coming out of those chimneys. And the scientists wrote in Science magazine that they believe that the Fischer-Tropsch equations explained the generation of that hydrocarbon material coming out of the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It's clearly not biological in origin. We've also sent probes now. The Europeans and the United States together have sent probes to Titan, which is the great moon of Saturn. And Titan ends up being filled with methane. It's been sampled, and it too has been found to be carbon-13, and NASA has declared that it's abiotic in origin. Of course, I guess NASA's alternative was to say there were little dinosaurs up there on Titan that created the oil.
Yeah, I mean,
methane.
If they're okay to talk about sort of extraterrestrial oil offshore. Yeah.
Well, I don't think we need to be going to Titan to get the methane.
Yeah. I mean, are more people
abundant
coming
here?
Well, sure. I mean, are more people coming around to the idea that this theory that you're pushing is, a good possibility? I mean, how is the scientific community accepting what you're saying?
Well, if you take a look at, I have always, since I was a kid, read Thomas Kuhn's The Theory of Scientific Revolutions. And Kuhn, I think, appropriately argues that, first of all, there is no proven scientific truth. Science doesn't prove anything. Science disproves material issues. Science advances by the null hypothesis. They reject hypotheses. There's no, even Einstein's theory of relativity. There could be a subsequent theory that supersedes it. It's plausible and possible. No science ever stops advancing.
Yeah.
And what Thomas Kuhn pointed out, it's usually people like me who are outside a scientific endeavor. I'm not a professionally trained or working scientist, but I have no commitment intellectually to the conventional theories that would ruin my career if I advanced abiotic theory trying to be a professional petrogeologist or to teach the subject at a university, which I have zero inclination to do. It would bore me to death.
Sure.
So I can pursue these ideas, and pursuing the ideas because they, not only make logical sense, but there's good scientific evidence for them. And I'm capable of reading the science. I'm capable of understanding the chemical equations. And I pursue these ideas as a journalist, and as I have since I was a child. These kinds of theories, the conventional theory of the biological origin of oil is going to be confronted by someone like me. There's other people who have done it. Thomas Gold, who was a physicist at the Cornell University, and Gold was always kind of a renegade scientist. He came out of Europe, and he was in Great Britain in World War II. After Great Britain decided he wasn't a security risk, Thomas Gold made great advances in helping to perfect radar. Gold was always fascinated by radio waves. He did spectrographic analysis of our solar system and determined that there was a lot of hydrocarbon in our solar system, and it got Gold to be convinced that oil was not biologically generated. If there was hydrocarbon in the solar system, and Gold had no reason to believe there was any living biological material in our solar system, he came to the conclusion that oil probably on Earth was also not generated by biological processes.
Sure. Yeah, that's right.
And Gold wrote a very, very famous book that, again, is out there, and I refer to it, the Deep Hot Biosphere, The Myth of Fossil Fuels, which was Gold's key work on the subject. And it's had a long history of being read by people like me, and it has become a classic in its own right.
Okay, well, we'll put a link on that, as well as your books, on our website.
Thank you.
just to, because I think that you mentioned him in your book as well. I'm sure.
Yes, I do. I discussed Thomas Gold at great length.
Yes.
Because Thomas Gold was, again, really critical. See, Thomas Gold studied the Russian and Ukrainian physicists and petrogeologists who were developing this Russian-Ukrainian theory of abiotic oil. I think those are the first scientists in the world that really formulated it, except for the Weimar Republic chemists who were on a mission. See, Germany had abundant coal, but it didn't have abundant oil. And so the German government wanted to be able to produce oil for military purposes and industrial purposes.
Okay.
And the German scientists began working on these Fischer-Tropsch equations in the Weimar Republic. The Nazis were very heavily dependent upon oil being produced synthetically. If you'll recall, the Nazis had the Polesti oil fields, which we bombed in World War II. And in fact, the strategic bombing study, which was done at the end of World War II, demonstrated that the bombing was done of German cities probably did very little to help win the war. It increased the resolve of the German people to fight against the United States.
Yep.
But what the damage was when the United States bombed oil and chemical resources, the Germans, who were still able to make probably as many or more aircraft in these broken-down factories because they decentralized production. They had the Messerschmitts built. They didn't have any oil to put into them.
Yep.
They had the Panzers built. They just couldn't run them because they ran out of diesel fuel.
Okay, going back to the sort of your theory of oil. If the planet makes its own fuel,
Right.
and some regions of the planet seem to have more oil than other regions. I mean, would you have a reason for that, perhaps?
It depends on where the fissures are, I believe. I mean,
Okay.
first of all, if you take a look at, I've explained Saudi Arabia with
Sure.
the fissures under
Sure.
Saudi Arabia. Then you just take a look at the Gulf of Mexico, which is abundant in oil. There's pretty good scientific evidence that there was this meteor that hit off the Yucatan at the end of the Mesozoic era. It's the Alvarezes and others have done great studies on that, and I think fairly convincingly have demonstrated that there was a grand meteor that hit at that time geologically. And I've gone and gotten the geological reports of the fissures and fractures within the Gulf of Mexico that resulted from that meteor hit. And they're very impressive. I mean, the entire bed of the Gulf of Mexico is deeply fractured as a result of that meteor hit.
Yeah.
And it would mean that oil again would be pooling up. If you take a look at the Cantarell well, which has been one of Mexico's biggest producing wells, it was found not because the Mexican government was looking for oil there. A fisherman named Cantarell saw oil pooling up on the surface of the water in the Gulf of Mexico. And said, what's this oil doing here? They thought initially it was from a sunken ship. And when the Mexican authorities investigated, they realized they had deep earth oil in the Gulf of Mexico off the Yucatan, and it produced the first major massive well that Mexico has used. We still derive a lot of our energy in the United States from Mexico. The different regions of the world, I think one likely path would be to examine where there are deep geological fissures in the tectonic basement of the Earth's crust. Because if you take a look at the formation of the temperature and requirements, heat requirements, and also the availability of the chemical processes, the hydrogen, the carbon, and the Fischer-Tropsch equations would require the presence of catalysts like iron oxide or some other catalyst that would induce the hydrogen and carbon to bind. Those chemicals and processes are available in the mantle of the Earth.
Okay.
So if oil is being produced in the mantle of the Earth, the question is where is it going to seep up, and it will seep up through cracks in the basement tectonic. You could also look at the plates and see where the plates come together on the Earth. There would be many different places where it would be surprising, perhaps. I also would argue that the coal itself, that the tar sands in Alberta, Canada, the oil shale in the Rocky Mountains, these are all forms of oil coming to the surface and forming in different chemical structures or geological structures, because the oil shales and the oil sands kind of form a vein coming through North America from Canada down to Mexico, and it seems to be all one similar kind of geologic process that probably caused the oil formed in the mantle of the Earth eons ago to exude and then to form these various geological structures we see today. But you could certainly, we're getting a lot of our oil from Canada and the oil sands. Why couldn't we, and the oil muds up there, why couldn't we also convert the oil shale in the Rocky Mountains? We certainly could.
Sure, I mean, that would make sense. Well, we'll come back to that in a minute. What about people's discussion about the pollution of the planet? I mean, do you believe that if oil is obviously a naturally producing product, do you think then that do you think we are polluting our planet? And do you think if we're going to continue to use it as a source of energy, and it's going to be there, 30 years onwards, do you think we're going to create a big problem with pollution?
Not at all. I think we can cleanly and safely use hydrocarbon fuels. They're produced by the Earth. They're natural. The Earth can see them consumed. I also think another hoax is this whole climate change hoax and global warming hoax. We can either come back and discuss that, or I can make some comments.
No, sure, go ahead.
Well, if we take a look at climate change or global warming, the initial panic or hysteria started over global warming. That if you take a look at Al Gore, the idea was that we are producing greenhouse gases by using hydrocarbon fuels, and the predominant villain here is carbon dioxide, which is exuded into the atmosphere when carbon-based fuels are burned.
Yeah.
So the idea is those are greenhouse gases that trap the Earth's rays and warm the planet, and the climate change of warming the planet will cause disastrous or catastrophic climate effects, such as the melting of the ice caps, polar ice caps, and the sea levels rising, so that coastal areas are inundated with water. That's one of the major ones that Al Gore points to.
Yes.
The problem with this is that clearly the planet has warmed and cooled. The issue is whether it's attributable to man-made causes. That's the key issue in the debate. I argue, to give you another, these things can be ridiculed easily. It's clearly the case that the Earth is warmer today than it was when ice covered much of the northern hemisphere and woolly mammoths roamed around. It's highly unlikely that it was the little cavemen and their carbon fires that caused the great ice age to retreat and the mammoths to die.
Yeah.
If you take a look at millions of years of geological history, there are periods when the Earth is either cooler and has ice covering much of it, or warmer. And over here in the United States, the History Channel has been running a special on what's been called the Little Ice Age, which occurred from about 1300 in the northern hemisphere through about the late 1700s. And if you think about it, the Napoleonic, clearly the winters in Russia have been terrible. I mean, they defeated Napoleon and Hitler. But if you take a look today, I mean, here in the United States, the schools are with pictures of George Washington crossing the Delaware River. The Delaware River depicted in George Washington crossing has always got these huge ice blocks and ice flows. And when you look at the Delaware River today, it rarely freezes at all. The Little Ice Age was attributed to much of the dying of population in the northern hemisphere through the Middle Ages because of famines and grain shortages, etc. So today, I think the Earth is warmer, but whether that's attributable to carbon consumption, carbon fuel consumption, I think it's highly debatable. If you take a look at the amount of energy, if you step back and say to Al Gore, and by the way, most of this global warming hysteria comes from computer models that attempt to model the global climate and make predictions as to what's going to happen. Well, these predictions are always wrong. It's like the peak oil guys. Their predictions about when we're going to run out of oil are always wrong. And instead of revising their theories disbanding them, saying that theory failed to produce a reliable prediction, so we're going to throw the theory out.
Yes.
They just revised the predictions. I mean, it's like, that's why I argue that for peak oil or global warming for many people, for the advocates, it's become more of a logical tautology. In other words, it's a logical structure in their mind. It has no provable basis in science. In other words, because they think of carbon dioxide as trapping light, they think, well, it's got to create greenhouse effects. That means greenhouses are where you put plants because they get warmer and grow in the winter. So the earth has to be growing. Well, that's about as sophisticated as the thinking is. The truth is that carbon dioxide is food for plants.
Yeah.
It's a very small percentage of the atmosphere, less, I believe, than 1%. The atmosphere is mostly hydrogen and nitrogen. So the idea that, we have more plants. The earth is greener than it was 500 years ago. Of course, that violates a lot of people's ideas. They think, oh, no, human beings are deforesting the world.
Sure,
well, it's just not the case. I mean, when human beings do move into an area, they do tend to deforest, but then within 2 or 3 generations, they reforest. And the earth today is greener than it was when I was a child because of reforestation, and possibly also because of some more carbon dioxide being in the atmosphere. But we're putting such a marginal additional amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by burning carbon-based fuels that it's not going to make an appreciable effect on the amount of energy that would be required, say, to raise the temperatures of the ocean by 1%. It'd be better to look at more dramatic impacts like sunspot activity and its correlationship with the Earth's temperature. That amount of energy that the sun could generate would be much more likely to have the impact of global climate change that's occurred in the United States or the world over millions of years.
Okay, Dr. Jerome, we're going to take a break there, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
To connect with the show, email kevin@themoreshow.co.uk. You're listening to The Moore Show, and here's your host, Kevin Moore.
Welcome back to the show. I'm currently joined here with my guest, Jerome Corsi, where we've been discussing his book, Black Gold Stranglehold, on the idea that oil is a naturally occurring product in the Earth. Jerome, welcome back. Just getting back to where we last left off, do you believe we could be in a coal spell compared to global warming?
I read scientific analyses all the time, and there are as many scientists. They just don't get the publicity because it's not the politically correct. It's not Al Gore. It's not the anti-industrial, which is the political left is tremendously anti-industrial.
Okay.
And they've championed this as a political cause, trying to convince people it has scientific validity. I read as many scientists who are concerned that we could be entering into a cooling spell, who have been studying sunspot activity and pointing out that it is less, that it has receded in recent years. Certainly, we've had winters that are much colder here in New Jersey in the last 2 winters than before. But, at universities, I have a PhD from Harvard. I taught statistics when I was in university. I never took a course in them, but I taught them. And if you take a look at time series analysis of data, it's always problematic. I mean, 1 or 2 years doesn't mean anything. You see it in mutual funds. People say, well, our investments have done extremely well in the past 5 years. We're number one. They say, well, how about the last 6 years? Well, in that period of time, we didn't do so well. I mean, so what is the correct time period for analysis is always a question. And I argue you cannot look at global warming with a few years, even 500 or 600 years of data. You've got to take a look at millions of years of data. And when you do, far before there were ever human beings on the face of the Earth went through dramatic cooling and dramatic warming spells.
Yeah.
Here in New Jersey, where I live, the predominant fossil found is shark's teeth. And I assure you that does not come from our proximity to Wall Street.
No, of course not.
It's because, eons ago, New Jersey was covered by a massive ocean, and there was times in the Earth's history when there was melting of the ice caps, when water covered areas of the Earth that today water has receded from. But it's not because of human activity.
But what about all the bad press that the emissions from all the oil-based pollution out there gets? I mean, if we're still going to be here with an oil-based energy system in 30 years' time, still going strong. I mean, okay, well, it's a lot cleanly distributed than it used to be even 10 years ago. But I mean, there's lots of activists out there who would say that we're not doing a very good job of it right now, even now.
Well, human beings always make the mistake of extrapolating experience. They say oil, when I touch it, is kind of grimy on my fingers and it looks slimy. So that had to come from something decaying. Or they say it's very smoggy today in London, and if we do this, we're going to destroy the Earth. Well, the truth is the Earth can absorb the smog of London. And if you want to say we want to reduce the smog in Los Angeles or in London, we can do that. It's tremendously better today than it was in 1950.
Of course.
And 50 years from now, it can be better again, because we can have cleaner burning of hydrocarbon fuels. By either going through chemical processes that remove pollutants or processes like catalytic converters that remove pollutants from being dispersed in the air in the process of burning them. So there's different things that we can do to reduce pollutants being expelled, and I think that's a valid exercise.
Yeah.
Certainly, we want to have a clean environment, but that we need a clean environment, because if we don't do that, the Earth is going to warm up and we're all going to die. That's ridiculous. If we want a clean environment because we want a clean environment per se, that makes intrinsic sense.
I mean, you could say the real crime is sort of the amount of trees that are chopped down in the Amazon. I mean, we're soon to tax our airlines.
If you study the Amazon, the irony is the Amazon's reforesting too. Of all the trees that have been destroyed for newsprint and tissues and everything else, there's still abundant trees in the world, and they can grow. They do regrow.
Well, that is true. That is true. Yeah.
And they can be reforested, and they can be reharvested. The idea, human beings, if you sit down and eat a meal, it's gone. And you can say, where am I going to get my next meal? Human beings are constantly worried about Malthusian fears that we're going to run out. And the truth is that today we have 6 billion people in the world. Well, we're not running out of food. We may be running out of the ability to creatively distribute food so people don't starve, but that has to do more with political and economic barriers than the ability of the Earth to produce the food to feed 6 billion people. I mean,
why do you think the oil industry as a group hasn't sort of come together to sort of talk about this theory? I mean, what's do you think the main reason behind it is?
I think the oil industry gets a great laugh out of it, just like I do. You pay lip service to the environmentalists and say, "Oh, we've got some wind farms over here, and look, we're spending all this money and looking at technology alternatives." But the truth is, what BP and ExxonMobil and all the rest of them do every day is they produce oil and natural gas, and they sell it in huge quantities. And they're going to continue to do that for the foreseeable future. And it's going to be both desirable, and it's going to be economically productive. We need energy, and it's not going to destroy the planet in a global sense or from climate change or anything else.
Yeah.
All these hoaxes are the same kind of hoaxes that Paul Erdman and Population Bomb used to like. They go back to Malthus. Read Malthus. We were all going to die.
Yeah.
There were too many of us.
Yeah.
The truth is that, yes, BP and the others exploring alternatives are fine. There may be some breakthroughs in hydrogen technology. There may be some other breakthroughs that occur, but the truly robust, permanent alternative fuel is nuclear. And my guess is that we'll be having nuclear batteries running our cars because of technological innovation, just like nuclear power runs the U.S. Navy, far before we ever have wind power or solar power be anything more than a minimally marginal contributing technology and an amusement.
Sure. Just a couple of quick more questions as well. With the US, I mean, it imports, I would say, more than 60% of its oil. Now, if obviously this theory stands firm, why are they still importing the oil when obviously there's still the wells within Texas? Well, there would be still wells out there somewhere.
Well, I think it's largely political. The United States could easily move towards energy independence simply by drilling more offshore, converting more of the oil shale that's abundant in the United States to oil, to gasoline. Of course, I think to some extent the oil companies, one of the dirty secrets of the environmental movement is the oil companies do support them. If the oil companies, I've got to congratulate them if they can convince everybody that oil's fossil fuel, there was only so many fossils, so we've got to run out. If you can sell us what people believe to be a scarce resource, you can always charge a premium for it.
Sure.
If it were truly understood that oil is not a scarce resource. A scarce resource by comparison is fresh water. Fresh water is a scarce resource. Oil is not. And the idea that the oil companies can convince people that we're running out of oil, that it's fossil fuel, we're soon going to be without it, and they can charge a premium for it, is a brilliant marketing idea.
I mean, another thing that also crosses my mind is why are we not building more refineries as well?
We should be. I mean, again, it's political. Refineries are nasty. They smell bad. The NIMBY, not in my backyard. I live in New Jersey, out by Newark. We have massive refineries.
Yeah.
They can be expanded. Of course, those are the scenes everybody think is New Jersey. They watch The Sopranos, and the opening scenes count by New Jersey. They think that's what New Jersey looks like. I live in a beautifully wooded section of New Jersey.
Yeah.
Those refineries don't destroy the trees I'm looking at this minute. They're all over the place.
Yeah. We
have trees and deer running everywhere. And that's, within miles of those refineries. We could have many more refineries, which would produce more supply. And in the economics of the oil industry, there is economic advantage in keeping oil and natural gas scarce. If it were truly as abundant as it is,
yeah.
And you'll see today, oil's trading at about $40-some a barrel.
That's right.
And what does OPEC do? They restrict production.
Okay.
It's a determined attempt to manipulate price. When oil is at $147 a barrel, which it just was last July, well, there's all the oil you'd want is abundant. $147 a barrel, they will take down the Rocky Mountains and use the oil shale. Yeah. And by the way, with our technology today, we can do the mining of these resources and restore the environment. Anwar, up in Alaska, Anwar is about the size of a postage stamp on a football field. Alaska's huge. Most people who are opposed to drilling in Alaska have never been to Alaska. There are parts of Alaska that are dark most of the year.
Yep.
There are parts of Alaska, there's so many mosquitoes, you can't go out in any way. I mean, it's beautiful to take a picture of Alaska and see this pristine environment. The caribou in Alaska spend most of their time hovering around the pipeline because they're warmer. I mean, we could certainly develop oil and natural gas resources in Alaska and not destroy the environment. But yet, the images of Exxon Valdez, the oil spill, well, that happened decades ago.
Yeah.
Oil spills that happen today are much more. Again, the technology's improved. They're much more readily contained, picked up, cleaned up, and they don't cause. We had a Hurricane Katrina, come through the Gulf of Mexico. We've had a huge political crisis in the United States because the levees broke and the 8th Ward, which was largely African American and poor, was inundated with water, and it's been a huge calamity in the United States. So we've spent years now reconciling politically, trying to restore economically. None of the oil rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico had any environmental damage. Why not? Well, because the technology today is so much superior that we don't have those kind of risks, just like we don't have Chernobyl risks, because they can be contained and dealt with. People are just fearful of this technology. But yet, try living a couple of days without electricity.
That's
right.
And
you'll see that we need robust energy. And as attractive as it is to say, well, let's just get it all with wind. Well, even Ted Kennedy, the great lion of the environmental causes, doesn't want a wind farm to destroy his view at Cape Cod.
So when do you think this lie is going to come to an end then? I mean...
Well, I think people like me, the Black Gold Stranglehold has become a classic, I believe, and it's certainly continued to stimulate tremendous amount of interest worldwide. It's had a life of its own. Worldwide, there's much more awareness that abiotic theory of oil exists, and it's being presented as an alternative to the biological theory of oil. Of course, the scientific establishment has all crossed their arms and humphed and said no, balderdash, we don't believe in it. Well, that's fine. They once believed the Earth was flat, and they once believed that everything revolved around the Earth. So another one of their pet theories may bite the dust, but it won't bother me. I'll continue to press and ask, you mean all this oil came from how many dinosaurs were there?
Well, that's it.
What do we have?
That's
175 million a minute?
That's it.
How many dinosaurs did it take to make a barrel of oil? How many plankton did it take? I mean, it's a ridiculous idea when you really start to think about the massive quantity of oil that has been found and available since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution.
That's true. And if you look at countries like Iran as well, I mean, obviously they're in the news a lot. I mean, how much oil would you say Iran's sitting on?
Unknowable, because again, a lot of these countries have not explored deeply, and when they do, they keep it secretive. There's been oil found in Afghanistan. Afghanistan didn't believe to have any oil. They're exploring oil off the coast of Israel right now and finding oil. I mean, I think that oil is going to be found all around the world in abundant quantities for the foreseeable future, far beyond where we can really want to use oil.
Yeah.
Today we're more oil dominant in terms of our technology and use of carbon-based fuels. I think it'll shift to liquid natural gas. I think an increasing percentage will become liquid natural gas. And then beyond that, I think we'll have atomic energy. So if you go out to a 50-year horizon or a 75-year horizon, I don't think that we'll be nearly as dependent on oil as we are today. But yet oil will still be abundant, just like coal is abundant today, when we're not nearly as dependent on coal as we were 150 years ago.
That's true. I mean, what would it do to the world now to know that oil was abundant? I mean, what would that do to the price? I mean, and to people's lifestyle? It would
fundamentally change people's consciousness about oil, and they would demand to have cheaper fuel available. And if people thought about this instead of a silly leftist kind of childish almost mentality.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be provocative here because I want to get a response. I'll get called all kinds of names, etc. And of course, that won't answer the argument. Now, in the future, we may have alternatives that do come in. We may have hybrids with electricity that require less carbon-based fuel to be burned. Fine. But it still doesn't mean it's intrinsically wrong to have burned the carbon-based fuel. It just means we're moving to a more efficient alternative. It's going to be the same with nuclear. If we are able to produce nuclear energy to power our cities, then there's going to be less need to have coal-based plants that will power the cities. Yet the coal-based plants can be made to burn cleaner coal.
That's right.
They can be made to emit less carbon dioxide or to trap the carbon dioxide. And there's no reason, I'm still wanting the definitive proof that the carbon dioxide is damaging the environment. If carbon dioxide doesn't damage the environment, carbon dioxide is not intrinsically a noxious chemical to human beings. Carbon monoxide is, and it's unfortunate for the environmentalists and the global alarmists that burning carbon fuels doesn't exude carbon monoxide. If it did, we'd have a problem. But since it exudes carbon dioxide, all we're doing is stimulating trees. We're producing tree food.
Okay, we're at the end of the hour there, so Dr. Jerome Corsi, thank you so much for joining myself. And if you'd like to grab a copy of his book, then just go to amazon.co.uk and look up Black Gold Stranglehold. Well, until next time, be safe.